Whoever learns the laws of tahara hamishpacha, as it's called today, even on the most basic level, anyone who learns that knows that at the most basic halacha, a woman who sees blood has to wait 5 days. Then she can do a hefsek tahara, and then she has to count, and then she could count 7 nikiyim. Now, why there's 7 days? Why there's shiva nikiyim for a nida? I have to assume that you certainly know. Size 7 bichlal and 7 nikiyim b'frat. But right now we're going to focus on those 5 days before the hefsek tahara and the shiva nikiyim. And as we shall see, it isn't quite so simple and straightforward as the shiva nikiyim themselves. Before I begin, I just want to mention that I hope those who were here last year remember that we discussed once the controversy of the mikveh in Rovigo in Italy. There was this idea about filling up mikveh with a keli that has holes in it, and how that turned into this huge controversy that was more than just halachic back and forth. It was like this huge machlekes that enveloped these communities for a couple of years. We went through some of the halachic shakavataya there. So perhaps one can say that no halachic subject is truly complete without a good geschmack Italian controversy where the Italian Rabbanim are going after each other. So fortunately enough, we found one for Ilchas Nida as well. Although it's possible you could say that this one is even lesser known and even more obscure than the previous one, because the Mashal, the mikveh, at least it was reprinted a few decades ago in Taras Yom Tif. This one is come out not mentioned anywhere. You really have to be familiar with it in order to know about it. One difference between these two is that the mikveh controversy was around the year 1600. So that means that the controversy was playing out through print. Everyone was printing a sefer or kuntras against his opponent. This ma'aseh we're going to talk about happened in the year 1455. To put that in perspective, the first Jewish sefer that was printed with a date on it is from 20 years later, 1475. So this vikuach was still taking place in a handwritten oifen. So at the center of this debate is a Rav by the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Yechiel, otherwise known as Meser Leon. In other words, his Hebrew name was Yehuda. His Italian name, which as was the practice then, was Leon. And the title that he had was Meser, which is considered to be one of the most important, significant titles that you could have. You could only use it if you had permission, if you were granted the title. And generally, Jews were not allowed to have this title, except for exceptions, such as Rabbi Yehuda. Besides whatever greatness he had in Torah, he was also a very important, distinguished doctor. And in fact, his name came up as well last year. We spoke about clothing from black hats. Where did the from clothing come from? And we started with the tshuva of the Maharik, very famous tshuva. The tshuva of the Maharik was to this. Rabbi Yehuda Meser Leon, the shaila was, can he wear, once he got his doctorate, which was also unusual for a Jew to receive, he wanted to wear the doctoral cape that they used to put on. If you were a doctor, you're able to wear the special cape. And the shaila was, is there Nishah Chukas Agoyim? And that was the big tshuva of the Maharik, which then influenced all the discussions subsequently on the topic. And here as well, we'll find the same two, Rabbi Yehuda Meser Leon and the Maharik involved here. But that incident seems to have taken place later because, based on what we know, he received his doctorate later, and by then Maharik was the greatest Rav in Italy. And this happened earlier on. But he already had the title Meser already at this point. So it starts with a letter that the Yehuda Meser Leon wrote. At the time he was in the city of Ancona in Italy, but the letter wasn't written to his city. It was written to other places in Italy. And that's part of the subtext of this debate, as we shall see. So this is what he writes. Maskina me'Maseches Nida. The conclusion in Nida is, yes. We'll break for that in just a bit. Let's not pile on all the facts and trivia, and I'll tell you in a moment where it's from. So the maskana in Maseches Nida Perek Yetz Daifen is that Hapileta Shechva Zera Roya Havya V'Sasra. So if a woman was with her husband, and now she has the Zera, and then at some point it comes back out, so that's considered Ore'iyah, and it's Seiser, the minion of 7. Right? So this is the context here is Tuma, and we're talking about Stama Zayin Akiyim for a Zava, and if there's an Iya in the middle, that would be a problem. So we're saying that this Peleta Shechvazara also counts as an Iya, and it's a stira to her minion of tahara. The context there is that it's Seiser one day, not that you have to start over again. It's Seiser one day, that day doesn't count. So we'll try to get at some point to how that ties in exactly to here. Hopefully it'll become clear as we go along. But that's all. He just quotes that line from the Gemara. So lachen, based on this, therefore, Isha sheshimsha and baila, right? She was with her husband right before she became a nida. So that means that in the first days following her becoming a nida, she might be a peleta shechva zara. So she shouldn't start counting zayin akiyim until the 5th day, which means he's saying you have to wait 4 days, and the 5th day could already be the first day of the zayin akiyim. And the example of that is, just to make it simple, let's say she was with her husband Matzah Shabbos, so the numbers of her days and the numbers of the week are going to line up. So and then she saw blood. So even if Paska Miyad, so she can't make a hefsek tahara, she should not start counting Zayin Akiyim ad Yom Hey, till Thursday. Thursday is already the first of the Zayin Akiyim. So therefore, before that, on Wednesday afternoon, she should do her bedika, do the hefsek tahara, start wearing white, and she can start counting from that night. Why? To be'inon vav oinus gimel yomim shleimin leplita. You need 6 complete oinus, 3 complete days, to be certain that the zara emerged, or that past that time it doesn't count anymore, doesn't have the halachic din anymore, as he's about to say in a moment. Right? So that means essentially it's really 3 days. If you're being chayshish for Peleta Shechva Zara. So we have this other makar that says that it's a 3-day thing, 3 not 4, but we're talking about that she was with her husband Matzah Shabbos. If you count 3 full 24-hour days, that means it's going to conclude at some point in the night. That means that you already lost the next day. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday night, sometime in the middle of Tuesday night, the 3 days expire. Tuesday night and Wednesday, already for Fallen, you can only do the hefsek tahara at the end of Wednesday, and that's how you end up with 4 days. And you're doing your hefsek tahara on the 4th day, and then you can start counting from the 5th day. After Lachad Gimel Yom Shleimim, then it doesn't matter if she's paleta something or not. It's not matama, it's not seiser. It loses its gather. Where did he get this from? So he says you'll find this din explained very nicely in the Rosh, in the Yoshri, in Nida, and in Sefer HaTruma, and in Sefer HaYereim. And this is what they quote from Ri, that Ri says, B'chalal, when it says Shiva Nekiyim, what does Nekiyim mean? Clean. Clean of what? Mistama Nekiyim afilu Meshich Vazara Kamer. Mistama, it also means clean of this. And this is the Mardchai, and the Ri Midura, and the Meisha Mikutzi, and the Smag, and the Smak. B'chein kol ha-paiskim shara isi. Okay, sounds very straightforward. There's an exception. Zulas Haravid. The Ravid actually says something else. The Ravid says, Sheseiseres lataras dafka. This whole concept in the Gemara that if she saw it, Seiseres, that's nothing to do with Nida, husband, it has to do with Tumas and Taras. But all the other Paiskim didn't agree, as you can see in the tour in Siman Kuf Tzadik Vav. And he adds, there's no difference here between whether this is a woman who's a Ba'ula, she's already been with her husband for a while, or whether she's a Basula, meaning this month of Shabbos was the first time. So the 7 days are being counted from Dam Basulam, essentially. Still the same halacha, we don't make distinctions, like it says in the Smag and Smak, and the Rim Yidura and the Mardchai, and then he concludes, finally, the final line is, Lachain hishamru lachem, pentit boil ha'isha sheshimsha. Pay attention, he's still saying, Ha'isha sheshimsha should not be toivel, bein basula, bein bu'ula, ki im mileo yudbeis va'elach. So, We just have to boil it down to one big number. Stop talking about 7. Let's just turn it into the 12th night. The 12th night again. It's 11 days, 4 plus 7, and then Milel Yud Beis V'Eloch. So that's already the official number. Just keep that number in your mind. And the fact that Yehuda Mister Leon is coming out with this announcement seems clear that obviously not everyone in Italy was observing the halacha this way. You should also already note at this point that all the Mekaydes that he quoted are either directly or linked to Ashkenazi Mekaydes. And he still didn't really spell out the whole Indian so clearly. And also note that, as we pointed out, he concluded Ha'isha Sheshimsha. So he's still only talking about someone who taka was with her husband, Matzah Shabbos, where Paleta Shabbazer is a possibility of Begashmias in the coming days.
He said being Basula ben Bula.
That was just that even if you're counting the 7, not Mitzad Dam Nida, but Mitzad Dam Basulin, but you're also counting 7 days, so you should also not be Mechalik. But he still said, yeah, that's what he means. Ha'isha Shishimsha bein Basula. So she was a Basula when she was Meshamish. Right, so it's still only limited to those who actually were Meshamish Payal, and also only 4 days. And this Gufa, they were not keeping in Italy, which is why he's telling them to do it. Before we get back to this subject, we'll just finish off the other points that the Yehuda Mister Leon raises there in short. The next paragraph, he says this is the stira, but when chafifa should it be done by day before toivling or by night before toivling? So he said, the conclusion is that you should start by day and go a little bit into the night. And if it's Matzah Shabbos, so you can't do it by day, so then it's all by night. And Erev Shabbos, it should be mainly by day. Goes into the other scenarios. He says this is essentially they're in the tour in Yeredeya, but he has skama Kolel, everyone agrees to this, he says. Apparently there's also something that people weren't doing quite as he's described. And he goes on to the next point. It says in Gemara that bein bismana, bein shalei bismana, it doesn't matter even if the woman is toiveling late. Ein tevelas ela balayla. The tefillah should only be done by night, not by day. Once you're past the 7 days, or you can be toivel whenever you want. No, only by night. Why? Mishum srach bita. Rashi explains that the daughters are in touch with their mother's patterns, with their mother's habits. The daughter grows up seeing that her mother's going by day. She doesn't chap that she only went by day once it was past the 7 days. She might assume that you could already be toivel on the afternoon of the 7th day. So mishum srach bita, there's this word that you have to toivel only by night. So this is what he's being more about as well. He's zaru taka to be toivel balayla. Doesn't matter if it's the 7th or the 8th or the 9th. And if it's not possible, if the Beis HaTevilah is out of the city, right? We know things, mikvahs were not as clean and convenient as they are today. So if it's outside the city and you're concerned about ma'alilim, someone's going to blame you for something, list them, or maybe the city doors are locked that night, there isn't free movement, you can't leave, or any other element of sakana. So then, I'll concede, he says that she could toivel by day after the 7th day, of course, and then she has to not be misyacha with her husband until the night. This is also maskanas hakoil, the Rambam, the Tur, and all the other poskim. Sounds like also this was an area which was not fully, in line with what he's saying. And he's mo'er that when she does the chafifa, it can't be with neser, with soaps and things like that, as it says in halacha. And he gets to the conclusion, and he ends off rather sharply. He says, from what I just wrote, so he goes really hard at the audience. And if a man or a woman do bezadin, anything the 4 things that I listed, yimachu mesefer chayim bim tzadikim al yikasehu, if dilei Hashem l'ra mikol shifta Yisrael, macha Hashem es shmoyim etachas hashemoyim. So, like I said, charging really hard. Misha para me'anshi dar enesh dar hamabu v'dar aflaga mistoyim v'ameira kairach v'adasai kol ha-rashayim sheb'chol dar v'dar. Go after whoever doesn't follow what I said. We'll pray this God, Yishchenu Nachash, Ad Hisham de Mitachas HaShemayim, so there's Chayim involved. Pi Yidaber Shalom, then he ends off on a peaceful note. Alami V'la Chasidov, signed, Ha'evet HaKatan, Ha'ayev HaNamon, Yehuda Misir Leon. And then there's a line afterward that says, Beferinza v'zulaso meglilas Taskanan. Now that seems to mean that, you see this often in Rishonim as well, sometimes the letter was addressed to someone. So when they're matik the tshuva, they also are matik the line of the addressee. So this line seems to be who this letter was addressed to. It's addressed to Firenze. Firenze is the Italian name we call in English Florence, which is in Tuscany. So now Ancona is not particularly close to Firenze and Tuscany. So this means that he's not talking to his own kehillah, his own crowd. He's sending letters to other places in Italy. And it seems from other responses that it seems like he might have sent it to the entire Italy. It just happens to be that the text that we have was collected and copied from someone within this area. So that was the copy they had that was addressed to this area. So, okay. So what was the response? It did not go it didn't go unacknowledged. So now we get to the next letter in this kavit. So now we'll pause for a second to explain where we're getting this from. So in the second half of the 1800s, there was a chevra called Chevra Mekitzei Nerdamim. Maybe some of you have heard of it. They were a bunch of people in Germany. At that point, probably not very frum or frum at all. It was linked and associated with the Haskalah movement, but the idea was Mekitzei Nerdamim, we're going to go through every ksav yad of ancient writings and we're going to print it. There's so much waiting to be printed. We're going to print them one by one, and it's going to be a scholarly, academic edition according to the standards of the time, which meant, of course, that it wasn't necessarily whatever their commentary they were adding wasn't necessarily Baruch Yisrael Salva. And Mekitzei Nerdamim is actually still extant till today. They're still printing stuff. They're still around in some form in Israel. So a few decades later, there was the frum response. The frum response. So if you look it up, it says there was a Svarim Seicher by the name of Rabbi Schwager. And he and his brother-in-law, Rabbi Dovid Frankel, who was a Rav in Husiaten, if you've heard of the Husiaten Rebbe from the Rosh dynasty. So they lived in Husiaten and they launched an organization called Dovid Sifsei Yeshenim, and the idea was that this is going to be the frum response to Mekitzei Nerdamim. And they started printing ancient ksavim as well. It also wasn't just publishing; it was also a mischer svarim. They were in the svarim selling business, and it was active from the beginning of the 1900s until World War I. World War I, everything got destroyed. But at its height, it was a very, very significant printing house, etc., in Galicia. We know, in fact, that the Imrei Emes of Ger was also very involved in the support of this project. So in Tafresh Samach Beis in 1902, they printed this small kuntres called Divrei Rivais Basha'arim. And the Takanas, it's basically this kavit starts off with Rabbi Yehuda Misir Leon's letters and then the responses that it got. And this is what's being printed here in this kuntres. Some have pointed out afterwards that it looks like this kuntres was really a collection by one of his opponents. It starts off with his letters, and it collects all the responses that are either completely disagreeing with him or breaking with him to some extent. That's what it looks like from the tone of the kavits. Interestingly, this ksav yad seems to have popped up recently again. The Kedem auction house sold a ksav yad with these tshuvas a few years ago, and they claim it's the same one that Frankel had. And in fact, Frankel didn't include everything, because after he wrote this letter, Yehuda Misir Leon wasn't finished. He sent out another letter telling everybody that nobody in Italy is allowed to learn the Ralbag anymore. Ralbag is banned because too many things in the Ralbag are too controversial and cross too many lines in Ashkafa. And Frankel didn't include those letters in this kavitz mitam hakomus, but it was printed afterwards. So the next letter in this kavitz is from Rabbi Binyamin Mehar Altzino. So in Italy, they like to sometimes translate Italian words into Hebrew. So Har Altzino really means he lived in a town called Montalcino, which is also in that area in Tuscany near Firenze. So he's considering himself to be one of the recipients of this letter, and he responded extremely sharply. And even beyond the halachic issues, he's clearly very, very up in arms about the whole ha'aza, that this Yehuda Mr. Leon is starting to push everyone around, the boss everyone around, to make zayas and threaten charamim. So he starts off a little cynically. He says, Taka is so nice. As kanomer, you're trying to enforce yigzedus everywhere. And kal kanesher, you're deciding, you already have a scale in Shemayim to decide if the rabag is kosher or not. Gibor kari, ladun yechidi, lahakdish nechasim, lakal avaryanim. And you're not disturbed at all. You're not held back by the fact that there's no such concept in our country of one Sraga in charge of everybody. You weren't dismayed by that. And the love, it's unbelievable to take such a personal interest in everybody. But I have some doubts about what you said. And he starts asking, where's this idea come from, of being machrim everybody like that? He says, if anything, truth is, ultimately, everyone has their shus to be machrim. Even the lowly person walking down the street, if it's justified, they can be machrim. He's like, how would you like if the women who you're addressing respond to you when they tell you that techula alav kol haklalos, all the klalos should go on your head if you do something wrong, if what you did was wrong, right? With your gzeda, you're being mevatel many oinus of the woman. Otherwise, the woman could have been in the matar earlier. Now it's being delayed. You know the Chazal about Bnei Eli. It says in the pasuk in Shmuel that Bnei Eli were sheichiv and hanashim that came to the Beis Hamikdash. So Chazal say, well, it's not that bad, but they were coming to be matar. They were bringing korbanos. The kinim and the kohanim there, they were schlepping. They weren't working quickly. So, mala aleim akosov, just by delaying them from becoming Torah to their husbands, mala aleim akosov kilu shachfum. So, you see how severe it is to delay a woman for no reason. And anyway, it's a chumra de asila de kula, that says in Yerushalmi, asr leisha shatamid b'tamasa, the tvila b'zman a mitzvah. So, if your psak is wrong, like your mom is being over on these types of things. And by the way, you're completely ignoring the idea of kinuach. It's a mishnah, mekvayis, and even the paiskim that are machmer in this, they mention kinuach. So what's he referring to? So if you look in the Torah, Taka and Siman Kuf Tzadik Vav, the Torah writes, Pilatus, if it's within 6 oinus, it's soiser. Therefore, mishameshes, concerned shema tifloit. So therefore, she only starts counting on the 5th day. Amram, Torah says, if she wants to start counting right away the next day, you can simply clean Isamakim and get all the zara out, and then there's no problem. Then the Torah, the Ramban says, you don't even have to do that. She just walks around a lot. We assume it all got released. That my father, the Rosh, doesn't accept. And he quotes the Dovid, who said that it's only for Taras, and that my father, the Rosh, doesn't accept that as well. So you see that the Torah and others were mentioning this kinuach. Why did Yehuda Mr. Leon completely ignore kinuach? So the women could have a good time on him. Maybe they should be threatening him, pushing him around. And he said, while he's taking issue with what he says, the worst thing was that you wrote, you have to count Yud Beis Yomim Nekiyim. How can you say you have to count Yud Beis Yomim Nekiyim? You know there's only Shiva Nekiyim. You have to make a distinction. You always have to say, you have to count Shiva Nekiyim and 5 days, right? That's what everyone does until today. No one says that kind of lashon. Shiva Nekiyim plus 5. When you say it like that, it's like Kilu Kulam and Atayra. You're even about Taisiv Rahman al-Islam. Maybe you're a Zak and Mamre. Continues in this vein to complain about this whole attitude, and he says, by the way, Dayala Eved, the Elias Kerabai. Mr. Leon, you have this title, right? The Pope, the King, they gave you this title. He says, the way Italy, without getting into how Italy was structured at the time, he says, that same Pope and King, they don't give our region gzedas, they don't push us around, even though nominally they have the title, they're not sending us gzedas every day. Your whole yichus is that the Pope and the King called you Mr. Leon, so you should act like them. They don't mix into our affairs, you too shouldn't mix into our affairs. Continues to say there's Nasi nowadays, Reish Kolel, based in Smuchim. Says in all the days of Tanoim and Amirar and Avon Severoi Goinim. Says even they, where do you see that they ever ganged up on a community and started threatening them, klalas or worse, to be Makabel Daitam? Marki Asrei or Marki Asrei. And if someone did have this power, shouldn't it be Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rav Ashi? He says they never, even though obviously we kind of look at it differently, but he says they themselves, they wrote their opinion, they wrote the other opinion. If they're writing differing opinions, it means that they're open to other opinions. It's not, the Mishnah and the Gemara are not written with that tone of my way or the highway. So what's the real way to have influence in halacha? You want to have influence? First of all, it's chachma, how great you are. Uminyan ha-talmidim. If you have a large number of talmidim, and then those talmidim disperse, and then they start influencing their communities, that's the best strategy. If you're just trying to strategize to figure out how can my psak reach the furthest. So you have to be mechaven to have as many talmidim as possible. So that's the pshat and chazal taka. You said this is like a conscious thought that they had. And then he in the letter he signed himself Oyev Haneman. So throughout this letter he sarcastically calls him the Oyev Haneman would want Taka to have this amount, this degree of influence and power. So start investing in Talmidim, gather a lot of Talmidim, and teach them your psakim, and then wait for the dividends to pay out. They'll start spreading and they'll start darshaning their Talmidim, and then you'll be able to see your psakim catch up. But just to curse and threaten, it's like the Vart to tell the wasp, I don't need your nice, I don't need your threats. Then he gets back to the actual Teichen. So he says, this first Gzeira, Nafshi Nivla Moed, I'm very taken aback. This Psak, according to Baal Truma, he's the first one. He says that Paskand, Shem Ri, wants to be Machmer and Tumas Peletas. It's not written in the Torah B'chlal. And you're being machmer dafke in that more than things that are in the Torah. And b'chlal, I have kashas on the Bala Truma, which the poskim are following. Medairaisa, she's only seiseres if it's bimei zoiv, the svira after zoiv. Medairaisa, if she's perletas when she's a nida, has nothing to do, right? Medairaisa b'chlal, it's not shiva nekiyah. Medairaisa is just 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, you toivel. And if she were, so when it was Ziva, if it was in a case of Deiraisa, all we said in the Gemara is that it says Seres Yom Echad. And then somehow, from Nida, which was extrapolated from Ziva, it turned from Seres Yom Echad into like a 4 or 5 day concern. Sorry. And in the case of Ziva, it means that she was Bata Mishameshus Be'isr. She was Mishameshus Be'isr, and then she saw during her Ziva, and it's only Seisei Yom Echad. And Mishameshus Be'heter, in the case of Nida, she has to add 5 days. The Ziva Mederaisa, who was Mishameshus Be'isr, is 1 day, and the Nida, which is not Mederaisa, who was Mishameshus Be'heter before, she has to get all these extra days. Those are his tinus. This is also Svira Zayin Yom Nekiyim nowadays is, of course, Reb Zera. And the word is Zayin Nekiyim. What does the word Nekiyim mean? It says, to me, the word Nekiyim means Nekiyim Midam. Tuma Acheres, Mandachar Shmei. How did other Inyanim of Tuma enter here? What does the Tuma of Peleta Shechazera have to do with Nida? Nida is a Tuma of Dam. Zayin Nekiyim means Nekiyim of Dam. Well, in Tuma Acheres Bezman Hazeh, how did this even enter the picture? And if we are Chayshish for Peleta Shechazera, then maybe weiter, nothing to do with Nida B'chlal. If you want to bring the halacha of Tumas Peleta Shechazera into today's day and age, so every time a woman is with her husband, she should have to wait 5 days afterwards until she can be with her husband again. Tumas Peleta Shechazera. What does that have to do with Nida? And does it make sense to be machmer more by a suffix than by a vadai? Right? I got the same variation what we said before. If she taka saw, it would be Sesaras Yom Echad. And here it's suffix Parletas, and now she has to wait all these days. And that's besides the fact that from the Gemara, it seems like the idea that the Torah quoted from the Ramban, that walking around afterwards should be enough to get rid of whatever is inside anyway. And let's talk about the Ramban Paskind. Let's go with that. And anyway, you have Dr. David. The David said that it's only taka for Taras. And he adds as well, repeats what he said earlier, that he completely left out the kinuach. What about the kinuach? Even the Paiskim Taka that were machmer mentioned the kinuach. Why are you only saying hal bezach, chatzi davar? Where's the rest? If she wants to count the next day, it says she should machnas amacha baget. If she's concerned she won't be able to do it well, it says she should wash and wipe herself. Between the two, you should be fine. So why does the Oyev Hanemon just say the Gzeira without this? He's being machmer more than the biggest machmer. He says, anyway, this Gzeira has no benefit. Not for the Tznuas, and not for the Prutzas. He says, the Tznuim, what they do is, they stay away from their husbands 3 days before their Vesus. Very interesting. He says, there were people who were chayshish to this. So the din is doch, isha sheshimsha. Okay? So they stayed away from their husband for 3 days before their expected Vesus. So that way, there's not going to be this whole din of isha sheshimsha. Plus, they do kinuach. So what do you want from the tznuas? They're fine anyway. And the prutzas, they're just going to follow the Rabbi, the Rambam. The Rambam didn't mention a word about this in Hilchos Nida. So he counts the Rambam in his column. So what's going on here? And then he concludes and he writes it seems like he's writing to Ferenza, that I don't understand why you're not reacting strongly. If you're makabel his Titus, so write back to him. Okay, you're now our pesach. We follow everything you say. And if you think that you're not going to be makabel what he said, so send his klolos back to him and say, you can keep them, keep your klolos. And or at least tell them you're not makabel them. We have our own svarim. We can learn ourselves. We know what we're doing. And no one appointed you as a sar v'shayfet, so we're not interested. If you keep quiet, I'm concerned that it's just going to come facts on the ground. In a year or two from now, all of a sudden it's going to, of course, we follow his psakim. No one said anything last time. So I'm sending his ksavim back to you, and if you have any answers to my questions, I'm happy to hear. He signs his name, Binyamin, Rabbi Yoav. He writes the date, April 6th, Reish Tezvav. We saw this last time also with Italy, that they had a minute. They used to use the Goyish month with the Hebrew year. There are other letters there as well from other Rabbanim writing along these lines. So we don't have that much time left, but then we have the Ma'arik. So we have a lengthy tshuva of the Ma'arik. He starts off with beautiful shyness. He's a lot more deferential to Rabbi Yehuda Miser Leon. He says, so to the first question, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda Miser Leon that everyday Shemayim should go along with that. It's quoting all the Rishonim, the Ribal Taisves. So it's printed in Shuvas Rivash for some reason. The Dovid Sifsi Yeshenim printed before Shut Rivash HaChadashas, and for some reason at that time they didn't know whose Shuvah it was, so it's in there for some reason, and it's also in the volume of Shut Ma'arik HaChadashas, which was printed in the last 50 years. So we have Ribal Taisves, who says you need Vav Einas. If Eratrumas Max, it's going through all the Makaidas, and all these Yishainim, they knew about all this information, and they knew that this is Goinim that say that it's only for Taras, and yet they don't mention it at all, or they pass on the opposite. And don't tell me it's just France, because it's talk a lot of people from France here, but it's also Ashkenaz. Goes to, you see, it's the Mordechai and the Rekeach, etc. And the Rosh, who was originally in Ashkenaz, and he went to Sfarad, and his son the Balaturim. So you see that it's spread in Sfarad as well. Even the Rashba from Sfarad. So this is okay. The Rashba in Teres Abayas discusses this, and he seems to actually lean more towards the Goinim. Meaning originally it seems like it was more like an Ashkenaz versus a Sfarad thing, and in Sfarad they were related to Paskin that has nothing to do with a Nida B'chlal. But then he concludes, he brings the Ri, and he says, so you see that even the Rashba ultimately is being led more towards the Ri at the end. And he says, it's not just, and now the Ma'arik for the first time introduces the following concept, doesn't even matter if she was, that's not only if she was Mishamish, and then she saw, even if she was b'chala with her husband b'chala. Like it says in Sefer Yashar, b'shem b'shimshin hasar mishantz, that gazrina natu shimsha. So we see there's already exeda that it's across the board. We don't start making distinctions between women. It's in every case. With Marikas, he says it's already the minhag. At the very least, if Shitaka was mishamish, then you should go with all these Rishonim that say what they say. Okay, he responds point by point to different points that Binyamin made. We don't have time for that. But he's very dismissive of Binyamin basing himself on the Ramban or the Ravid. All these poskim know about the Ramban and the Ravid, and they don't paskin like them. So what are you trying to say? You're tying that you shouldn't be machmer and a suffix more than a vada. What do you mean? By a vada, you know that this is the one day, so you only are limiting it to one day. When you have a suffix, you don't know what day it's going to be. The Gemara mentions it's 3 days, so that means if we have to translate it, you do have to wait multiple days. What do you want? But then he concludes and says, "Klal oil is emes v'yatziv this taka that you should be machmer." But I was also shocked by your tone on your attitude. This is a davar pasha, the Rebbe's make. Also has who to rely on. He starts quoting the same list of Rishonim back. So as long as Rabbi Yama was attacking the Balatruma, Marek is defending the Balatruma, who are you to attack the Balatruma? But when Yudim Yisrael Leon is attacking people that follow other psakim, so then he stands up for those Rishonim. How can you start up with them? You have the Rambam, he says the Rambam is also on the list, taka, of those who say it's honest. You have the Rambam, the Ramban, the Ravid. So in conclusion, then he also responds, what about the Kinuach, right? Binyamin was asking, what happened to the Kinuach? So he says, there's already Mekayis that say that we're not Samech on Kinuach anymore. The Smak says, we don't know how to do it, and he quotes some others as well. So that's why Kinuach is out of the picture. So by the time you finish the Ma'arik, we're going to finish in less than a minute, hopefully. By the time you get to Ma'arik, so you already have more or less as we know it today. It's not just the Isha Shemsha, but even the Isha Shemsha, because of this Gzeira. It's not just Kinuch doesn't help anymore. He quotes again that Shimshon said again this bar that even if Shemsha. So that's why we don't rely on this anymore. But again, if there's a place that has a minute that they follow other psakim, then don't bother them. So in conclusion, what we have here is that how does this? So the Gemara mentioned in the Gabi Ziva. From Ziva we applied it to Nida, and from Tumah we applied it to Labaila. From Vadai we expanded it to a suffix, and we said that in the Gemara that says the Shiur of Plishah Bazaras for 6 oines. So that means she has to wait Melchatchila always 3, which is really 4 days. And even if she and from that we expanded it even if she's not with her husband. And next time in Hashem, we're going to see how because in light of the gather of this halacha, so when you have an issue with fertility, where a woman's ovulation is too early, or fi halacha, 12 days is too late for her, when Rabbanim are trying to see what they can fix or change or play with over here, they're much more likely to focus on these 5 days due to the nature of the halacha, and we'll see how this idea develops. There is a way to get around the 5 days. We said it's Hashem next time, the Shabbos.